20-year-old young man that we came across. He's like, my generation doesn't want the beautiful lie anymore. They want the hard truth. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. Yes, I want the hard truth too. Every time.
What's up, guys? It's Josiah Keneally, and along with my wife, Micah, we host the Young Adults Today podcast. We're really glad that you're here. We're doing something in this episode that we've never done before, and that's we're looking back at last year, 2024. We are sharing some of the best of. This is some of the most downloaded, most viewed, and most shared episodes of the Young Adults Today podcast this last year. And what's crazy as well is we're at the point where there's over 300 episodes on this podcast. So shout out to every viewer and listener and guest. We couldn't have done it without you. And this is an amazing community called Young Adults Today. If you're new or newer, subscribe wherever you're watching, if it's on YouTube or if you're listening, streaming on Spotify, Apple, somewhere else. Give us a rating, subscribe. That way you'll never miss a conversation like these ones. And also, we'll be able to continue to bring you amazing guests. Really, our heart is to serve you. And Psalm 145:4 says it best. One generation is to tell the next about the marvelous deeds of God. That's what's happening. We're fanatical about the faith of the next generation, reaching young adults for Christ, training leaders to do the same. So many churches are reaching out, denominations are reaching out, starting young adult ministries, strengthening young adult ministries. Maybe you're in a season of volunteering, of launching, of relaunching, of building a leadership team. Well, we're here to help. Leadership does not need to be lonely. And so as we look back on 2024, Ryan Skoog is an amazing friend of ours. He kicked off 2024 with an amazing call for us as leaders to lead with prayer. Not just to lead, but to lead through prayer. He has an amazing book out called Lead with Prayer. But he marked our souls last year. Really a clarion call to lead with prayer. Check out this clip from Ryan Skoog.
But there's some really good science that 20 minutes of prayer for 8 weeks so affects your brain, the synapses of your brain, that you can measure it on a brain scan. Prayer is physiologically changing us. And at the areas of your brain that have more compassion and openness and grace and forgiveness, those areas get stronger, and joy. And then the areas of your brain that are like the bitter and the resentful and all of those areas actually get smaller. So it's literally like the fruit of the Spirit happening in you if you can take at least 20 minutes a day for 8 weeks.
Ryan leads an amazing nonprofit called Venture, doing the toughest things in the planet for the toughest places possible. You can learn more by watching the video or listening to the episode with Ryan Skoog and checking out the show notes as well. And up next, Jade Warshaw works for Ramsey Solutions with Dave Ramsey's team. She's a newer friend of ours, and she shared in this clip about how she and her husband paid off over $400,000 worth of debt. Yo, that's amazing. It's inspiring. It's incredible. Check out as we learn from Jade Warshaw.
All they care about is Jade. We heard that you had $460,000 of debt, consumer debt, and then we heard that you paid it off. How did you do it? That's really what people want to know. And so that's where I'll start. My husband and I graduated from college, and back in 2007, and a week after graduation, we got married, right? So it was super whirlwind, really fast. And at the time that we got married, we had no idea how much debt that we had combined. And early into that first year, it started to kind of show itself, right? Because you take out student loans and they're not due at first, right? You graduate and there's no bill, but 6 months into it, those bills start coming in. And so it was just this perfect storm of student loan payments becoming due, us realizing that we didn't really have careers and we didn't know what we wanted to do. And also the Great Recession started happening. And so it was like this horrible avalanche of circumstances. And it just caused us to start asking a lot of questions to each other and to ourselves. And that's how we realized, man, combined, we have a lot of debt. And we were both brought debt to the table. My husband brought the bulk of the student loans to the table. He had about 200,000. And then I had the other 30 or so thousand. And so then we had 2 cars that we couldn't afford and credit cards and all these things. And it was like, all right, we need to do something. We need to come up with a plan. And it was in that moment that I realized, oh, there's this guy. What's his name? Oh, yeah, Dave Ramsey. I think that he can help us. And so I told my husband a little bit about Dave, and we found his radio show, and podcasts had just came on the scene, like as this thing that some people listened to, but some people didn't. And we found his podcast and went to Barnes and Noble and bought the Total Money Makeover workbook. And the rest is history, man. In 7.5 years, we were able to pay off that debt and really get to living our best lives, honestly.
Jade, that is incredible. That's an inspiration,
Mhm.
a ton of hard work. You know what? Money is more than just a math problem, like Jade said. And up next is one of my favorite episodes, was so inspiring. Jonathan Brozozog really encouraged pastors and parents to have a vision for their family, to have a vision for their home life, to have a vision for what is the season of life that you're in. And this next clip really spoke to my soul as a dad of 2 young kids with another little one on the way. But check out what Jonathan Brozozog had to say about parenting.
Or the age that you'll make the most money in life is between 50 to 60 years of age. That's your most money. Then it goes 60 to 70, then 70 to 80. So what I'm just saying by that is anyone in their 20s and 30s and 40s, these are not your money-making years. These are your parenting years. These are the years to be at home, develop a family, develop the culture in your home, to make sure your marriage is strong. They're not your money-making years. And when you sell those years for money, you're selling them for the least money you'll ever make. You just don't want to sell your birthright for a bowl of soup.
Yep.
And you go, well, I'm not an absentee father. You don't have to leave home to be absent. You could be in the car and be absent. You can be in the living room and be absent. And so I just want to encourage you, these are not your money-making years if you're in that age demographic.
Okay. We love to kind of just push the envelope with conversations. And we hadn't found much research yet on Gen Alpha. I'm a millennial. The talk of the town right now is kind of Generation Z. But really, as we try to look around the corner, what's coming, Gen Alpha is on the scene. Ages 0 to 15, really, Generation Alpha is something that we need to unpack. So we had a conversation with Dr. Rob Hoskins. He's a brilliant researcher. He's a brilliant mind. He leads One Hope. And as you can see, some of the other clips, they're like 30 seconds, a minute or 2 minutes. To really get a glimpse even of Gen Alpha, it takes a 12-minute clip, a mini episode right here with Dr. Rob Hoskins. Here's 3 things that you really need to know about Gen Alpha.
Of the global youth culture and the global children's culture that's out there. So I'll speak to, yes, the United States, but really it's what we're encountering with kids everywhere. So some of our latest research on Gen Alpha is really interesting because they have some attributes that are very similar to Gen Z. But just recently, I was just praying about it. I just came off my 21-day fast. And so I was praying through which I like to do, praying through our latest research. And the Lord sort of gave me 3 A's, 3-letter A's as I'm praying for Generation Alpha. So I like the transliteration there. I've got the A's and I got my 3 A's, Generation Alpha and my 3 A's. So the 3 A's for me to sort of describe this generation and how I also want to grandparent is around these 3 A's that I feel like the Lord's given me. And the first one is authenticity. I think they're a very authentic generation. And that was, yes, true of millennials, yes, true of Gen Z, but I see even more of that in Generation Alpha. And when we talk about authenticity, it really is about the genuineness. And I think in many ways, we're seeing that the church in the U.S., maybe we're victims of our own success and we've had incredible growth, but we've also, I think, experienced what we call the nuns, where there's many Gen Z that are just asking questions about the church. And a lot of times what you'll hear in their answers, and I see this carrying through with alphas, is that, well, I don't really think they're an authentic community. I really see a disparity between sort of the public life of the church and the private life of their leadership. And so they're seeking out leaders and community that are filled with authenticity. And I think with authenticity, there's sort of two levels of it. One is sort of the character of our ministry. So there's a real, not just ambivalence, but almost an antagonism against leaders that they feel do not have a genuine interest in who they are as an individual person. And so just the whole kind of nature of celebrity leadership and sort of building our own social media platform. Generation Alpha is really skeptical and cynical of public personas as opposed to your private, authentic relational capacity to relate to me as an individual. So I think with the explosion of social media, you have a lot of Christian leaders who have created a public persona which does not feel authentic, approachable, or genuine to Generation Alpha. So that's sort of on the personality side of it, and sort of the nature of our leadership being truly authentic, being in the moment, having a genuine interest in them personally is huge. They're really hungry for authentic relationships, and I think a lot of it has to do with the connectivity and the social media that exists, where they know, like, so one of the data points with alphas is, more than any preceding generation, when we ask them what is the most influential voice in your life, and we were pretty shocked across the board. By far, number one was their parents. Like they said, my parents are the most genuine. And then we did some qualitative research to follow that up, because we thought, man, this is the most connected generation. Why? They're saying we thought it would be their peers. We thought it would be social media platform as an important voice in their life. And they go, no. We sort of understand that we have two personas. We have our public persona, which is who we put out there for the world to see. And then we have our real authentic self. And they themselves know that those two are not always aligned. And so they said, we know our parents truly care about us probably more than anyone else, and they see who we really are more than any of our peers are the public platform that I've created. So there's that authenticity in relationship. But the second area of authenticity is really about content, and they want authentic content. And what we mean by that is, I think a lot of our Christian faith in the evangelical community in the US in their minds is kind of prepackaged. And it's kind of like, hey, here's who we are as, quote, evangelicals. And we try and a lot of times what they perceive, whether they're right or wrong, is that what we put out there as our content isn't very approachable for them and the realities of the world they've grown up in. So they've asked some really hard questions about the faith. And I think the level of their questions coming out of millennials, Gen Z, and now Alpha are hard questions to answer about human sexuality, about mental health issues, about depression, about technology and about creation and science. And so oftentimes when we give sort of a prepackaged answer that has been, 100 years in the making in the evangelical world, that we've sort of used these stump answers that we as an evangelical community hold to be sort of these sacred truths, and we throw them out there. And then when they question us on them, when we don't come back with kind of authentic answers from the Bible for those questions, then they shut us off and they sort of go, man, if they can't answer my questions about these issues, I'm going to start questioning everything about the church, everything about their leadership. And so when I'm talking about authentic, I think we need to really focus in on who we are as leaders, as parents, as friends to this generation. But I think we also need to be super transparent and humble about our content and how we project our truths and the Bible and our doctrine and our theology. And I think to be authentic, we've got to thicken our theology. We've got to thicken our scripture engagement so that we can help this generation think through the answers culture is asking them that the culture never asked our generation, my generation, your generation. So the first A is authenticity. I'll keep going.
I can't wait to hear what the other two are. Let's go.
Okay, so if the first is authenticity, the second is autonomy. And so just the nature of Generation Alpha is very autonomous. And if you say, what is the predominant worldview of an alpha, it's expressive individualism. And this is what sort of Carl Truman's book, on the rise and what is it, the rise and triumph of the modern self. You know, Truman sort of traces it as a historian, a Christian historian and philosopher, what is sort of the child of secular humanism. And what he says is where we've landed is expressive individualism. And that's for a lot of reasons, philosophically, but also spiritually, and also just from technology. Like the individual in a knowledge economy is empowered and almost has a responsibility. I think this is probably a lot of the reason there's a lot of mental health issues for an individual to determine who they are. Like every individual has to determine for themselves, what is my true self?
Yeah.
What is my personal sexuality? That's why you have, now hundreds of different descriptions of what your personal sexuality will be. But it's really in every area of your life. Like I am an autonomous being, and there's almost an obligation on me to figure this out by myself. So if you look at like even Web3, which is the newest sort of stage of the development of the digital technology,
yep.
Web 3.0 is very much focused even more on autonomy.
Yep.
Because Web 1.0 was kind of like our engagement with knowledge, and Web 2.0 was sort of our ability to create knowledge. And so that's where we have our own platform where we can sort of put out there to the world and broadcast and create on our own. But Web 3.0 is really about the integration of knowledge into my real and virtual lives that I live. And so if you're talking about creating your own autonomous self and integrating that into every aspect of your life, this puts an incredible amount of pressure on you as an individual to decide who you are. And so, and you know what, Josiah, a lot of that is in the scripture. Like Jesus in many ways, I just want to say expressive individualism is bad or evil, and man, they've got it all wrong. I mean, Jesus was a huge proponent of individual decision, right? He gives us free will. I mean, there's nothing more expressive individualistic than free will. Like we get to decide whether we follow Jesus or not. And even as a child or young person, we've talked, what is the age of accountability? When is it that a child will make that decision? The Jewish faith, like try and pour as much into them by the time they're 12, but then it's up to them to do the bar mitzvah and to pass on to adulthood. So there's always been within the Jewish and Christian faith, the Judeo-Christian, exactly what you opened the show with, like your passion coming out of Psalms, that we would pass it on from one generation to the next. Well, the only way it gets passed on is if in the next generation makes the decision on their own whether they're going to have their own faith. And then Jesus is a radical, comes out and says, hey, not only do you make your own decision, but the decision you make to follow me might really destroy your family unit. Like it might, you have to love me more than father or mother. That's a very autonomous call to action that Jesus gives. And so Jesus believes in many ways in expressive individualism. But I think it's also really important for us to have a theology of autonomy, which says, okay, because like even the latest expression of Web 3.0 is creating a decentralized, autonomous organization. So instead of like currencies and corporations and being built from the top down, they need to be built. This generation, alphas are going to increasingly say, no, why? It doesn't need to be top down. It needs to be bottom up. Like me as the autonomous individual can find other people, and then we're going to build from the bottom up. So they have this strong sense of autonomy. But what I tell a lot of Gen Zers and now even alphas beginning to create content for them is to say, in many ways, that flies in the face of another aspect of the scriptures, which is, there is an element of autonomy, but there is always being part of a new family, right? Jesus calls us into a new family. So you're free to choose whether to accept me or not. But once you accept me, you're part of a new family called the family of God. And within that family, there is, like any family, there's accountability. So this generation craves community, and alphas even more than Gen Z. Like they're dying for that authentic community that we talked about, but then they have this tension of their autonomy. And so a lot of them like want autonomy without accountability.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, there's no community without a level of accountability in the
For sure.
family. So it's, I think, for us as young leaders, and especially for any aged leader that's working with the next generation, to really figure out this tension between accountability and community, and accountability and autonomy and individualism. But I think at some level we've got to say, we've got to figure this autonomy thing out. So we've got to figure out the authority that comes with the freedom of being part of God's new family. But then also we want to be authentic in that. And then the last day is agency. This is the most cause-oriented generation in the history of humanity.
Okay, and up next is, as we've introduced the subject of AI, of artificial intelligence, of Gen Alpha, really the next place to go is to talk about discipleship. Pastor Terry Parkman from River Valley Church just shares a deep dive on what we need to understand about future generations and how our models of discipleship need to speak their native language. Check out what Pastor Terry had to say.
Discipleship has always reflected the age that we live in. I've talked about this one time in my life, so you guys are getting it here first. And this is what we're going to need to do today to disciple, okay? You have the agricultural age. You're valued by who you are, right? Because of who you were, told everybody what farm you grew up on, who your grandparents were, everything else, right? And the discipleship, the discipleship value in that was the Imago Dei. Who are you in Christ? What is your identity? And man, we do a good job of that, right? We talk about who you are in God. All of our discipleship models shift into the industrial age. Now you're valued by, hey, what do you do for a living? Because what you do ascribes value. And what we had as a predominant discipleship track was the Missio Dei. What are you doing for a living? And that's where our callings became so prominent. Like, so who are you in Christ? What are you called to do? And we do those two things well, but we fell off after that point. Because what emerged is that digital age, or the informational age, is no longer, hi, who are you? Or hi, what do you do for a living? But hi, what do you think? And what you think determines your value. Look at social media today. What you think determines your value. So now that's a cogitatio Dei. That's, are you having the mind of Christ? Are you thinking biblically in the world around you? So not only do I need to have the identity of Christ and the mission of God, the calling of God in my life, but do I have the mind of Christ? Can I love God with all my mind and process and think in the society that I'm in? The last one, this adaptive age that Gen Alpha's in, is how well do you move? How well can you adapt? It's called the modus Dei. How does God move, and can we move like him? The Holy Spirit is like the wind, and he goes wherever he pleases, and so must his servants also be.
Man, we love having Pastor Terry Parkman as a frequent guest on this show. And Grant Troutt at the time was leading Harris Creek Young Adults. And he brought up a fantastic point of how younger generations and young adults, really, vulnerability is vital if you're going to lead in a way that younger generations can follow, and not just strategic authenticity, or I'm going to share this so you trust me, or so that I look good, but honest and open vulnerability. Check out what Grant Troutt had to say about really what God's doing through Unite Us on college campuses and in Waco at, young adults. Check out what Grant Troutt had to say.
Experience is, without vulnerability and authenticity, they're out. They're out. And so when you lead from a place of, I don't have it all together either, all of a sudden their ears perk up and they're like, okay, so you're not this pastor up here with a 10-foot wall in front of you. You're not preaching at me. You're speaking with me. I've learned that when I lead with my wounds, I lead with vulnerability, they're drawn in. And so for any leader out there, any young adult pastor, it's like, don't act like you're perfect. Lead with how you're struggling. And so for me in 2019, I had my first panic attack ever. It's been a 3 to 4 year struggle. Like when I say struggle, I mean, had a panic attack for 8 months straight. Wow. And I couldn't leave my house. And what that did was cripple my ability to speak in front of people. For 2 years, I felt like I was muted. And now God is calling me to this position of leadership. Before this podcast, I am sitting here praying, because as simple as a podcast on Zoom, my legs will start to shake a little bit and I will get so nervous. And I'm going, God, I need your strength.
We live in a moment culturally where there's a lot of doubt. There's some deconstruction. There is deconversion or denunciation of the Christian faith. And apologetics, I think, can almost be overlooked, but it's really on the rise again. We sat down with an apologist and evangelist, Lee Strobel. Lee is an amazing guest. You'll want to go back and for sure watch or listen to the whole episode with Lee Strobel. But we asked him a few of the toughest topics and questions about theology and faith and Christianity. Here's what Lee had to say.
God took the worst thing that could ever happen in the history of the universe, which is the death of the Son of God on a cross, and from that created the best thing that's ever happened in the universe, which is the opening of heaven to all who follow him. So if God can take the worst thing in the universe and turn it into the best thing in the universe, he can take, either in this life or the life to come, he can take our circumstances and draw good from them. So,
okay, without a doubt, 2024 was an incredible year. You can go back and watch and listen to any of the episodes that you found helpful. Again, please subscribe, leave us a review. It'll help us reach more listeners with the message of young adults today. Here on this podcast, we interview generational researchers like Dr. George Barna about the faith of the next generation. We talk to apologists like Lee Strobel and really unpack deconstruction, the questions of theology and faith and adulting. And really, we tap into wisdom from theologians like Dr. Alan Tennyson. We talk with pastors and local church leaders like Pastor Rob Ketterling, Pastor Matthew Stephen Brown, and so many amazing local church pastors. Sometimes we'll talk about finances because adulting is hard. And whether you're a church leader, a ministry leader, or somebody working with young adults, sometimes things like mental health and life and adulting or future and finances. Like we talk with finance experts like Rachel Cruz, George Camel, and also Dr. John Deloney, and thought leaders are really a lot of our guests on this show as we bring you the best about reaching young adults for Christ in our world today. Thrilled that you're here. Go back and leave us a comment. Let us know which episode you found most helpful, but we're glad you're here. Here's to the best year yet. Still to come in 2025. We'll see you back here as new episodes drop every Monday. Until next time, this is Josiah Keneally on Young Adults Today podcast.